Everybody, this is Joel Marshall, and this is Lunch Therapy.
Oh, hi everybody! It's me, Boney, and I'm here to welcome you to today's episode of Lunch. I love lunch. What's for lunch today?
All right, that was Boney. That's my sidekick, Boney. Anyway, so good to be here. We're streaming out to Facebook and YouTube and Twitch. And today is Interview Friday. I'm calling it Interview Friday. I'm going to try and get guests on here on Fridays to interview. And today we are lucky enough to have the front man of the punk grunge band Gas Huffer, Matt Wright. Matt Wright has... we taped this yesterday because what's tape? I don't know what tape is. But anyway, we taped it yesterday, and because I don't trust the internet gods, I think maybe we're probably streaming okay today. But if I threw in a whole Skype or whatever, that would be a mess. So we're going to get right to it. Show's going to be a little longer today because this interview is uncut and just letting it roll. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and I figure, hey, it's the internet. We're not confined by any rules. So the interview's about 40 minutes. And Matt and I will be in the chat room. I think Matt will be there on YouTube. So if you guys have any additional questions, we can do that whole meta thing there. So without further ado, my interview with Matt Wright. All right, here we are. Finally, this interview, after I don't know how many years, 30 years or something, Matt Wright and I are here talking to one another.
That's right.
We grew up together. My earliest memory, my mom says that maybe we met in preschool, but possibly like even kindergarten or something. I'm thinking it was probably first grade. But my mom took me to Rick Steves for piano lessons on the recommendation of your mom.
Wow.
I think that's pretty much what happened. You were taking piano already, and I wanted to take piano, and or I'd been taking from this person who was very impatient.
Yeah.
And so
who was that? Because I probably took piano from that person too.
It was like an older woman, and she would actually hit the keyboard. I thought she was going to close the top of the keyboard on my hands.
Brutal.
So then I got Rick, and Rick was much more, he was much more nurturing. Although I didn't practice. I was terrible at practicing.
Yep. Me too.
I don't know why I was so undisciplined. I was so undisciplined.
Me too, man.
Oh God. So I just dreaded the piano lessons every week. Thank God he became a travel guru and not a piano teacher, because that must have been frustrating having the kids come in. And I always had some kind of excuse why I didn't practice. And I had to come up with that excuse every time.
Yep.
It's humiliating. Take the hit.
Yeah. He sent me home one time on the music piece that we were working on, his notes for that week, written in pencil. His one note was crappy! !
Yeah. I think probably in the piano bench at my parents' house, I still have music with notes, with his notes on them.
Did he ever write crappy on yours?
I'm sure. I'm sure. And then he would always play something. He'd play the song, and I'd be totally inspired when I was in the class, because he'd play these crazy things, and you'd be like, he enjoyed it so much. And he just was, really, really into it. And I thought, well, this week I'm going to practice.
Then recitals at his dad's piano store, which I think is now his travel store.
It could be. I know it's across the street or something.
Yeah.
I was so nervous when it came to the recitals that I could barely even keep it together. I'd get so shaky. And then there was always one guy who obviously practiced. He was just like a master. And he just made us all look horrible. Just get up there and it was the craziest thing. Yeah. So anyway, we were talking, and I'd say we probably, I don't know how many conversations we had in high school. Not that many, probably.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Together and stuff, and I
was thinking about that. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Yeah. Yeah, there's probably a lot we can kind of dig into there, but it's just interesting to see kind of where everybody went and like how many I don't know. We just went to school with some people that went on to do some amazing things.
Yeah,
I was
we
just
did.
thinking about that. Yeah.
And we grew up in Edmonds, Washington. We went to Woodway High School that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Shortly after we left, I think it probably merged with Edmonds High School.
Yep.
And I can't say, I mean, I don't know why amazing people came out of that school. I can't say it was the most nurturing environment ever.
No, in spite of.
I was having the other day, I had on there the weird things that our teachers said to us that you and
Yep, I saw that.
That was nuts. And we had maybe I don't want to drop too many names. But we did have a principal, I was saying, who I thought had some
the vice principal.
Or vice principal, yeah. That
in charge of discipline.
In charge of discipline.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
He got real mad at me because of my weird haircut, basically.
So you had like a cool looking haircut. Like what was it? I
had a haircut that was like a Dorothy Hamill kind of lopsided mushroom do. That like so back then, you know, and I was thinking about this too, like all of my school career pretty much, I had this weird thing where it's like, I'm not into sports. I read a lot of books. Just felt so nerdy, you know, and like, you know, for the most part, people weren't that cruel to me, but sometimes they were. And then I just discovered this like world of music, right? Like new wave music.
Yeah.
K-Jet.
I remember you used to wear a big puffy coat. Do you remember that?
Coat.
It was like a down coat that you used
to. My mom made me a coat.
Oh, your mom made you a coat?
My mom used to do like back in the day, she would make like rain ponchos and sort of these patterns of things that now you would go buy at REI or something like that.
Oh, that might have been
She made me this down coat with like a floral yoke. And I'm Mom, those are flowers.
Bad enough.
You're sending me out into the world with a floral yoke to junior high school. Where I'm spending the entire day holding it because I heard that if you go to the bathroom, they're going to give you a swirly.
Oh, yeah. I was always afraid that they were going to put me in the locker because the whole thing was like, they're going to put you in a locker. And I'm sort of claustrophobic as it is. And the idea, I think my head would explode. I don't think there was a lot of talk at Madrona Junior High of hazing. And how people were gonna like make you do all these kinds of things. I don't think I don't think anything really ever happened to me.
Well, I held it all day.
You did?
Yep. And the minute I got off the bus, I just like booked home. I booked home so hard, run into the bathroom, and I could like see my bladder was visible on the outside of my body. And then I would pee for like 5 full minutes. I was so terrified. I threw up a lot in the morning.
I think junior high school
junior high.
It was the most stressful time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very stressful time.
I was the only one in my gym class that wore a jock strap. But I didn't. Because it was on the list. You know?
Yeah, they told us to have one.
Yep,
for sure.
But I didn't know you were supposed to also wear underwear. And
I could not figure out how it worked. I just couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, and then one day I was, you know, walking through the hallways with my gym bag and my whole entire gym bag dumped out.
Yeah.
And my jock strap obviously fell on the floor. And this girl, now I can't remember her name, but she was like a really like desirable person to me, like this cool rocker chick.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name, but she grabbed my jock strap and she like ran around with it like, oh, look what I got. Come get it from me and stuff. And that was just crushing blow.
So you got into music in high school, like new wave music? I remember there was one girl in our like class who was really new wave. She had a new wave. Lori Moan was always sort of heading that direction.
Yeah.
And then there was this other girl who had a new wave haircut. And
Andrea Perneda?
Oh, maybe that's it. Yeah, that might be it.
Maybe, but yeah, for me it was like, oh, well, here's this kind of group of people in which my weirdness can actually have some cachet or like
Yeah.
some, I don't know. And also just emotionally, you know, I found that music really like helped me out. Like there was KJET, there was KCMU, and then there was one other, I think KRAB, this one other station that was way, way far to the left.
Yeah.
And
Always at the end of the dial were the interesting
yep,
ones.
yeah, and just kind of like I started getting weird haircuts and wearing two different colored Converse and wearing an overcoat.
Yeah.
And going to things like concerts at the Mural at the Seattle Center and seeing like local bands, like the localness of it was really, I mean, you know, on KJET there were mixes of things like the Cramps, but also like, Kaja Gugu, like weird, like British, like pop bands that seemed new wave to us. But and then just like finding this kind of local community of kids in the high schools that were into that stuff, and like, oh, there's, because I'm into this, I'm like meeting girls and stuff like that, and like it all came together, and like just like, how you try to find an identity for yourself.
And at the time, I mean, we were growing up, it was sort of a pre-grunge kind of era. I don't know if people
way
you guys would call it grunge. I don't know if that's a bad word to you, or is that really what it's been called, what it's called now, that music wave?
Do we want to talk about grunge?
Well, let's talk about, I want to talk about how you got into that, because I remember in high school, like you said, you were kind of an outsider. You were a smart kid. There were a lot of us couldn't really find our little niche, because we couldn't define ourselves really very well. I mean, like you didn't want to be like a brain or whatever, and you weren't necessarily a jock, and you knew a lot of people, but there were some people like Kevin Sherman, you, Matt Kite, a lot of people that were sort of not in a genre. And so we were sort of disenfranchised. I know, we started this thing called the Myth Club, which was sort of like the anti-click, I guess. And that was sort of grew out of that feeling of sort of like not being in a group or not being cool or not being,
Can I ask you a question about the Myth Club? Did you guys have a faculty advisor?
I wish we did.
Oh.
We always said that Leonard Nimoy was our faculty advisor.
Okay. I was just sort of wondering if somehow you
it wasn't a real club.
Created it as an official club.
I created it. One day I was in Mrs. Sperling's class, history class, and I used to write stuff on the board before class. So when she would come in, I'd write hey, it's my birthday. And she'd come into class and everybody would sing happy birthday, and she wouldn't know why. And she'd turn around and it'd be written happy birthday on the board. Or I'd write something like, this is not true. So when she's lecturing, it would just say, this is not true. So one day I wrote myth meeting, 3:00. And at 3:00, all these people showed up and we started that club, and that's kind of how it started.
You mean the right people showed up or just random people showed up?
Just random people. I mean, it's like Jeff Lohman, and, a lot of them are friends of mine.
Scott Amy.
Matt Latimer. Scott was kind of cool. Scott Amy was kind of in the cool group because he played on the basketball team. If you played on the basketball team, you were kind of in.
Oh, sure.
That was a very specialized thing. If you did that, you were cool.
I remember being at a Woodway basketball game watching Scott play, and his dad was in the stands, and his dad was like, "Perform, Scott!"
His dad was great. I saw his parents recently. They came down here. They were on a cruise, and they came and I took them around town. It was really fun.
Cool.
But his dad said that when he was in the band, in high school, he would play the trombone and he would throw his slide out onto the court if he was upset. So he was obnoxious as all get out. But I want to get more into the thing about, so you're starting to go to these clubs, and you went to clubs downtown or something like that?
The first thing I did was really just go to free, all ages outdoor shows, right? Yeah. And actually some of these local bands were actually playing at the high school dances.
Really? Yeah.
So there were a few bands that were kind of new wave cover bands. Mm-hmm. But then there was a band called Visible Targets that I remember. They actually played original material at school dances and stuff. Wow, and so school dances were a big thing for me, because it's weird, because that's where some of that music was happening, and I really liked dancing to it and stuff like that.
That was like a huge event, going to the school dance.
Yeah. And we even promoted some. I remember me and Robert Lee we made a poster that was sort of kind of aspirational about what we hoped the school dance would be like, with like an Anarchy A and some like kind of punkish. Yeah. And we went and we put it up at Edmonds High School. We were like stapling it up because we wanted to get some of the cool kids from Edmonds that we thought were cool to come to our Woodway dance. And the janitor just like went after us. You could put that, that ugly, terrible, awful.
Do you remember somebody did this? I don't know whether it was Jerry Parton or what, but somebody made a poster for a band that was fictional.
Oh yeah.
And then they put it all around, and there was like, they said where it was going to happen and when it was going to happen and all this stuff. And then all these people showed. Apparently it was very popular, but then there was no band.
I love that kind of stuff. That's actually how Mark Arms started his first band, Mr. F and the Calculations. They were just all posters for a fictitious band playing fictitious shows, and then they became a real thing. So I'm in favor of that type of.
Me too. What do you think was the? Why do you think? I feel like at that time we were pretty cynical. We were really like to, I always say the Myth Club was, what its mission statement was to confuse people that take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the vibe at the time for people like us, was to come up with things that were just confusing.
But another thing Robert Lee and I did was we made this poster that we put in the display case at Woodway that was like a mashup of this old map that I had that had like some Arco dude, like doing this, and a skeleton and stuff. And it was like, Mr. Skelly says, better stock up on Diet Pepsi for the apocalypse, or something like that. And we just put it where all the other announcements were, and we got in so much trouble.
That's hilarious. Now, when did you start a band? Was it when you were at Whitman?
I had a band actually at Woodway.
You did?
We had a band called the Body Bags.
Oh, the Body Bags.
John Townsend was in that band.
I saw you guys at Laferno's.
We played at Laferno's.
Remember Laferno's? That was like a gangster place. I mean, that was like, his dad was like a Seattle gangster, I think.
Could be. So the thing about Laferno's is that there was a guy that worked there by the name of Charlie Ryan. Uh-huh. Charlie Ryan was the drummer for a legendary Seattle band called the U-Men.
Yeah.
One of my favorite bands of all time, and this kind of also fits into the story of what I went on to do in music. But so Charlie was a waiter at Laferno's, and we went to school with Tony Laferno.
Yeah, Tony was behind me in my neighborhood. Yeah, I love Tony Laferno. He's passed away, unfortunately.
Oh no! Yeah, actually, I think I did hear that. Actually,
yeah. His sister lives down here in Southern California, but he passed away.
Wow,
it's a drag.
Oh. So for Charlie, it was like, well, the boss's kid asked me to play at this thing. Yeah. And so, we finagled our way on the bill, the Body Bags. And and this is during the era when it was really cool to be a Republican. Very strange time. I have another story about that, but we had this upside down American flag with the words World Incest Tour spray painted on it.
Yeah.
And our fellow high school colleagues were really offended by that, and they came and yelled at us about it, stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, well, how come you're drunk? That's against the law.
So it was you and John Townsend and who else?
And then a guy named Matt Jones, who went to a different high school, but later went on to be in some cool bands in Seattle. And then Flip, what was Flip's last name? He went to a different school too. And I started out as the keyboard player, and my brother John was the singer, and then my brother John
Rick
was
Steves,
like, I don't need this.
Rick Steves origins coming back.
But so then I became the lead singer, and so we played this show.
What made you think that you could be a lead singer of a rock and roll band back then?
Probably because I was a really bad piano player, and also because I was interested in writing. Yeah. So it was sort of a vehicle for lyric. Yeah. We played this show, and Jonathan Sposado's band played. They were called like Monsieur Blanc or something like that, with this like French exchange student.
Had a band.
Jonathan was in the Body Bags, and we actually asked him to not be in the band anymore.
Oh no!
Yeah. So when I think back on that, I'm just like, man,
damn, I blew it.
Well, but just also like,
Yeah.
Why did you
Why?
think that was important? Like, what
Right.
an asshole.
I know.
Like, why would you do that to your friend?
So, like, why is it
So
worth it, really?
fucking
You know what I
dumb.
mean? Oh, my God.
Yeah, there were these two other young women who answered the ad. Oh, a guy named Tim Ebling, who's no longer with us.
Oh, yeah,
who
Tim.
also passed
He was
away.
like a genius, that guy. I remember one time, this is one time that I remember, maybe you were there. We were on a
Yeah.
boat, and we were playing Trivial Pursuit. Tim was there. Lori Moan was there.
Yep.
And Tim was drunk, passed out on the ground. But we couldn't play the game because he kept yelling out the answers,
Oh.
even though he was like passed out on the ground. And we're just like, would you just stop that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he was a guy that actually did not go to any school, but I met him because he put an ad in the Rocket to start this band. So that's how the high school band started.
Wow.
But then that show at Laferno's in that killer ballroom that they had upstairs.
That was cool.
And the U-Men, who were pretty famous for kind of stalking off stage if the conditions didn't meet their exact specifications. All the people I went to school with were yelling, play some AC/DC at them and stuff like that. And they were just, yeah, we'll see you guys later. But that's how I met Charlie Ryan. And Charlie actually is part of a family of his dad, who's passed on, was a sports investment counselor.
Okay.
Meaning he was running numbers.
I see.
So
yeah.
That was kind of my first, like, this is weird. Like, there's this Irish family in Seattle that's kind of like an East Coast, like, how is this Seattle-y? And then later on, I realized, oh, of course, like, Seattle is the edge of the world. Yeah. Like, of course.
That's where people go to hide, I think, probably.
Well, I was, a bunch of years ago, I was at the Bottleneck Lounge, which is a bar in my neighborhood. And I was talking to my friend Mike LaFawn about the Ryan family and about just that whole story. And the young woman behind the bar was like, oh, are you talking about the Ryans? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, oh, my dad owned a Brutzie's Pizza, and he was a bookie too. Wow. So they all knew each other and stuff like that. So that was like.
Do you think they just had to get out of town and come to Seattle?
No, I think that is actually part of a sort of pioneer culture. Like, I think that at the end of the world.
Yeah. I see.
I mean, when you learn more and more about Seattle, there's all kinds of like speakeasies and
There's a book called
the
Jack Roller. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, but I'm going to look for that because I remember hearing it was about that, about the speakeasies and the different things that were going on in Seattle back in like the 70s or so.
And even before that, like the rich culture of jazz and African-American music and clubs in Seattle. Jackson Street After Dark is a really good book in that way.
Okay.
So anyway.
Yeah. So
how did we get there? Where we?
Yeah. So then, okay. So you met this guy or whatever, and then
they were like gods to me. The U-Men.
Really? Yeah.
They were like
huge.
They
were like a big
really
influence
nervous.
For you. Okay.
Huge influence for me. And I would say in them, I realized that there was like hardcore was kind of cool to me, but there was a part of me that always was really responded well to like grooves and kind of swing and stuff like that. And the U-Men were the first group I ever encountered that could really pull those things together, like arty weirdness and just like finger snap and swing. Yeah. And kind of just aggressiveness all in one thing. And that sent me down the path of like the Cramps, and the Cramps sent me down the path of the Sonics and the Wailers. And it's just that whole thing opened up for me. And yeah, plus they were just cool. They walked around in like top hats, all dressed in black, and like bones around their necks. And they were just like these really cool, scary dudes. Yeah. And then fast forward years and years later, when I was in my band at Whitman College, I walked into Fallout Records and realized, oh yeah, that's Tom Price from the U-Men. That's the guy that works at Fallout. Fallout was one of my favorite record stores ever. And I just asked him, hey man, what would it take to get the U-Men out to Walla Walla? And he's like, oh, about $200.
And you're like, I'm going to get that together.
So we did it, man. Yeah. Like that's I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about what happens when you just ask.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's a really good point.
And that's a whole other story that we can talk about how that all went. But in the interim, so I went from going to these free all ages shows, at the Seattle Center, to like, you know, getting a driver's license and discovering, I mean, there was a lot of things. I think that I just got into the very tail end of this club called the Metropolis in Pioneer Square.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually dragged Kevin Sherman down there once because I was terrified, you know, like
Yeah.
I was really scared of going in there. That was an all ages club. We used to have these all ages clubs in Seattle.
Yeah.
But the one that I went to in its heyday, and I went every single weekend, was called the Guerrilla Gardens on Fifth Avenue in the International District.
Yeah.
Guerrilla Gardens had 2 rooms. They had the punk room and the metal room. So it was like this weird kind of mixing of punk rock and heavy metal. And so the punk rockers and the rockers were kind of converging there.
Was that, was Mother Love Bone? Would they play there?
This is way before Mother Love Bone.
Way even before then.
Yep. So I would go down there every weekend. I didn't even know who was playing half the time. I just, you know, Tim and whoever, John Townsend, we'd jump in my parents' 74 Volvo station wagon.
Yeah.
Which I would try to hide, you know.
I remember going there. It was crazy. It was a crazy place. It was fun.
Yeah, it was like I worried a lot about showing my suburban roots.
Yeah, you were trying to be cool.
Yeah, so I saw the Butthole Surfers. I saw Husker Du. I saw the Wipers. I saw an early version of Soundgarden that was a trio with Chris Cornell singing and drumming. Green River, tons of Green River shows. Yeah. So Green River is the band that later, you know, basically split into Mudhoney and Mother Love Bone. Mm-hmm. And then the Mother Love Bone faction became Pearl Jam. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was going to see these shows that are all in that, is it Our Band Could Be Your Life? I'm trying to remember the name of that book, but that entire era of American music was happening at that club for an all ages audience for like $5 every weekend.
Was there anything going on like body passing or?
Oh yeah. There was, we call it, you know, this was even probably before the word mosh was, you know, it was still called it slam dancing. I got my nose
slam dancing. That's what it was called.
Probably broken. Probably got my nose broken watching The Accused. Like there was a cracking sound and blood came out.
Yeah,
you know?
We used to slam dance just even at the football games, like the high school football games. And
I used to wonder what it'd be like to who's the physics teacher at
Mr. Freed?
At Woodway, Mr. Freed.
I
always thought it would be really cool because physics and chemistry had like the big experiment, like the lab desk in front where a teacher's desk would be. I thought it'd be so rad if kids had like physics t-shirts, and while the information was being, you know, while the lecturing was happening, they were like stage diving off and like we had a physics mosh pit.
That'd be good.
Thought that'd be rad.
At school would be more fun.
Yeah, totally. Like, you know, like just so getting.
Why do you think there was all that slam dancing? Do you think that was something that came out of the Seattle like scene or whatever? Or
that was a punk rock thing more broadly. Yeah. So that was a national and international thing. Mm-hmm. We, you know, the people that were, and there was no way to gather information really except through zines and stuff. There was no internet, right? So people were just making up what punk rock is.
You would look at the albums and you'd look at the pictures and stuff and try and figure out what the hell was going on. It was like, everything was like a mystery. That's what I liked about not having the internet. Everything was a mystery to be solved, and you could make stuff up and you could pass things on through word of mouth. And it gave it a mystique.
Yeah, so probably that stuff was happening in DC hardcore scene, probably in LA.
Black Flag and all that kind of stuff.
Black Flag, yeah, that's a whole thing. Isn't it? But I remember really actually from the sort of trying to explain to people that this phenomenon that looked so violent from the outside was actually kind of like a community thing. Because everybody kind of took care of each other. They used to kind of take care of each other in the pit. If you fell down, someone would pick you up. I remember watching some show at Guerrilla Gardens and a guy fell on his head. Oh. Like he did a stage dive and fell on his head and went into a seizure. And I forget who the band was, but they were like, okay, everyone make room for the EMTs and stuff like that. Wow. So, anyway, that was going on.
It's kind of a community going on there, which is
That's cool. What it felt like.
And I think it's interesting that you say there was like a convergence of like punk rock and heavy metal, like that
in that space for sure.
Yeah. and
People
maybe
talk
that's
about that as being kind of like the mix that gave birth to whatever we call
really?
grunge, right?
Yeah.
Like people who were punk rockers kind of embracing their like classic rock and heavy metal, you know, guilty pleasures or roots, and you know, giving birth to this heavy music that was kind of like slower than punk rock, and kind of, if you've seen Hype, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the thing where the guy demonstrates punk rock goes up, grunge
Oh
goes
yeah.
down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. It's a simple thing. It seems like a simple thing, but there was such
yeah.
talent too at the time. I mean, you know, you guys wrote.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And just this idea that we were flyover
yeah.
country for any national tour, like the people that came through and actually played in Seattle had a big impact.
Mm-hmm.
Because so many people just skipped Seattle and went straight up to Vancouver, and people were driving up to Vancouver to see shows and stuff like that. I think you talked about this in one of your recent live streams about Seattle, and how we just kind of felt like we were looked over, and there
Didn't it
wasn't
feel
any,
like we were just like
no
nowhere?
pop culture. Yeah,
It just
people
felt
didn't
like we
know
were
what was
not
out here.
represented in any kind of magazine or any kind of TV show or a movie.
Yep.
You never saw a movie with Seattle in it. You were just like,
Harry and the
"Do we even
Hendersons.
exist?" Yeah, Harry and the Hendersons, right?
And you watch, but there's no way they could get from there to there that quick.
Right. You learn about movie making.
It's not called Pike's Place
Yeah,
Market.
what the hell? I know. But
Here
it was
Come
like
the Brides.
exciting. Yeah, Here Come the Brides, right?
Yeah.
Which is in Seattle as well.
Yep.
No one would remember that, but perhaps.
Yeah.
So then fast forward from there. So then when you became like you're a big rock band. What was that like being at the lead of you had a persona for one thing. It was almost like a character that you were playing by that point. Did that evolve out of something? You know, your persona. You had the big mutton chops, and you move around on the stage like kind of like you're an old man.
Yes. Yeah. Now I'm an old man. Now I'm a monkey.
Right. So what did you?
Those are like the two moves.
How did that evolve? How did that happen?
That's a really good question. I think that was just sort of an expression of kind of all the things I was into in a way. Like, I mean, I was really into the literature of the American South. My mom is from Arkansas, and she, you know, we always had a lot of kind of like folk music and hillbilly music in the house. Yeah. It's funny. I remember one interview where people were like, at the same time, it really bugged me when people asked me questions like, "Are you into rockabilly?" You know, like, yeah, but I'm not into rockabilly. Like, I think at the root of what it was that we were doing, we were into punk rock in the broadest possible sense. Punk rock, the punk rock of the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and to some extent in the 90s, because you just couldn't, like, that's the zeitgeist we were in. And so we were pulling in, you know, weird Jesus Lizard stuff and kind of weird arty stuff in the mix. And then we had this guy, Tom Price, who was our, you know, the guy that brought us all together, you know, using these seventh chords and using these time signatures that were actually like happening in 3s and 7s and 9s, but jammed into 4/4 time signatures.
Was he some kind of musical genius or what?
He is a musical genius. Yeah, he definitely
You guys had an alter ego band as well, right?
We had a band called the De Lagunas. So the De Lagunas was, if you said, "Hey, will you guys play at our wedding?"
Yeah.
The De Lagunas was all instrumental music, or starting with our kind of love of surf instrumentals, but then we would play all kinds of kind of instrumental soul music and movie soundtracks and stuff like that. So that was really fun. So the persona, I mean, you know, personas are good if you have to get in front of people.
Did you find that you were like,
don't you know what I mean by that? Like you need
to have an idea.
It's part of you. Yeah. It's a part of you that you just bring forward to claim the space.
I love putting on a mask, you know, you put on a mask,
I've seen you in masks.
All of a sudden you get like a freedom, you know, to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's just, even if it's a little bit of freedom, like even just a slight adjustment, all of a sudden you're free somehow. You're not like, oh, it's about this person, not about me. It's not about me. And sometimes that can be really good.
Yeah, so I just actually thought of a really big influence on me in this way, which is that when I was in college, I took an anthropology class, and we watched a film called The Holy Ghost People. which actually became the name of my college band. It was so influential to me.
Yeah.
And what this film, The Holy Ghost People, is a black and white document of a like a Pentecostal worship service where they handle snakes.
Wow.
You know about snake handlers?
I've seen it.
So there's a really good book about snake handlers as well called Salvation on Sand Mountain, I believe. And this journalist actually enters this community and actually participates in this activity. And so the snake handlers interpret certain verses in the Bible really literally. And they believe that when you're filled with the Holy Spirit, you can't be harmed by poisonous snakes or any kind of poison. So they'll drink strychnine and stuff like that too.
Seen that.
So they like dance, they're like they're singing hymns and throwing these like poisonous snakes around.
Yeah.
And the guy who's performing the music for the ceremony is like this dude in like a lame dinner jacket. He looks like, and he's got the slick back pompadour and like a Fender guitar, and he's like just playing this like kind of like rockabilly music, and some old man is just like dancing like one of those those things you see at farmers markets where it's like a jigging wooden doll at the end of a stick,
right. Oh yeah.
And that to me was just like, this is what I want a rock and roll show. I want to be in a band that makes people like lose themselves in that kind of.
And did you find that with your audiences that they just kind of lose
sometimes
themselves? You said that you had a kind of communal experience. Like you didn't want it to be about you necessarily. You wanted it to be an experience.
For me, the pinnacle of it was kind of the total disillusion of ego, kind of like this idea that you're involved in this kind of almost Dionysian like ritual that's so about the experience that the you in the experience kind of melts away, which is a weird thing because you're kind of trying to lead it and shepherd people through it in this way. But like, if I was fully consumed in that kind of weirdo old man monkey, I mean, by the way, Joel, the entire time I was hammered.
Yeah, that's what I understand. That's what you told me. I was like, but I mean, I guess that's what you needed to do at the time. But I find that a lot of times actors end up having like drug problems or alcohol problems because they couldn't get over that initial like kind of fear, so they grab that in the beginning and then that enables them to do it. And now all of a sudden they're kind of dependent on it. Like they get, you know what I mean? And I don't know whether that happened to you or what.
Well, I don't drink anymore.
Yeah, well, most of us don't, the living ones. I
can say so there's some other things about it as well where I would like, I got to think about if my kids are going to see this or not.
Yeah. You don't have to say that.
I just remember certain instances where like I would really believe that I was getting down, I was in a James Brown mode, just like fully putting it down. And then I would talk to people after the show and they would be like, dude, you were barely moving. You mean that entire package of espresso beans that I ate before I went on stage actually, like the micro dancing wasn't visible?
It wasn't visible. That's hilarious.
But what you actually make me think of is which Walker Percy book is it that talks about, it's a book of essays that talks about this idea of re-entry for creative people.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in a flow like that, when you leave yourself behind and you are fully in a flow, it can be kind of a drag to come back.
Yeah.
Into yourself and into the world, right? So I think a lot of people become addicted to all kinds of things as a way to help them manage the just the depression that comes with that re-entry.
Isn't that something? It is. Yeah. I think that's a very good point. I find that as a performer too, that it's like a kind of a roller coaster ride of emotion. And there's lows to all the highs. I remember the lead singer of REM talking about that. Michael Stipe was saying that when he comes off tour, he has to kind of come down. He wants to be around a lot of his people that have known him for a long time because they can kind of help him
that's a whole thing.
God complex that he developed in front of all these people. You know what I mean? Or this high or whatever it was.
I had plenty of things on tour to knock me off of any pedestal I might have been building for myself. But coming home from that is for sure a thing, because the thing about being on tour, for me anyway, is that it was the only time in my life, although maybe we can talk about how that's changing a little bit for me, but where the thing I wanted to do, the thing I was supposed to do, and the thing that was sort of making me money were all the same exact thing.
Which is
like, and the instructions were so clear, because for me now in my daily life, it's like, well, what do I do first? What am I supposed to be doing? That's always been a struggle for me. But when you're on tour, it's almost monastic. It's like, okay, everyone's awake now, pack up your shit, get in the van. And then you're in the van for a certain amount of time. Sometimes it's a really long time. Maybe you're doing a lot of reading in there and stuff like that. By the way, we had no cell phones. We had no laptops. I had a pager. We can talk about that in a minute. But then you get out of the van, you load your stuff in, you sound check, you wait for the show, drink a lot of free beer waiting for the show. You play for like 50 minutes, wait to get paid, pack it up, go back to the house that you're staying in. We always stayed at people's houses with very few exceptions. And then for those people, it's like, woo, party night, like the band is here.
Yeah, right.
And you just repeat that over and over and over and over again. And there's never any question about what it is that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And then when you get home, it's like, oh, this is like normal life. If you have a significant other that you're coming home to, which I did for all of it, actually, there's this dance that you have to do a little bit. Like, you remember me, and like, I tried to write, but, I was in a flow. Like, you did matter to me, but I was self-actualized
right.
for about 6 weeks.
Yeah. Oh man, that's tough. Well,
it's just an interesting experience,
Yeah, and it's an adjustment period that you always have to go through.
Yep, re-entry.
And for your mate too, it's
totally.
Difficult. I mean,
yep.
The thing that you said about being it being like an experience that is beyond the ego, I heard that also from the Grateful Dead. That's one of the things that they did do. Was their idea of performing it's not about us and it's not about our ego. It's about everybody in this communal experience, and we're just kind of a vessel for that. And I think that's kind of a good way to go. I mean, in general, as a performer, something to think about at least.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the thing that I'm finding in my advanced age, and even professionally, and kind of what I can see as a way forward professionally, is that this is a slightly different topic, but there's this, for me, what's emerged is that confidence. Mm-hmm. When you locate confidence in kind of yourself and like, oh, am I good enough? Are they going to see through me and see that I'm not worthy in some way? That's just so, like, the flip side of that is identifying a mission. So you relocate kind of everything in that mission. It's no longer about you. It's about moving the mission forward.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really important. I mean, whether it's a Myth Club or whatever, it's deciding what is this about, and then how can I facilitate that thing? And then it's not about my ego and not about my thing. Yeah.
It's a sort of more about how you seek to move the mission forward and how you seek to serve the people you want to serve with that mission.
Yeah.
And then, like, what I found is, that stuff has been kind of clicking for me a little bit lately. And so now I can talk like to anyone about this stuff, with tons of confidence, because it's not really about whether or not it's me, And then the other thing that I've kind of come to realize, and I know I'm getting way off topic here, but there's always going to be someone that does what you do, the exact same thing that you do. There's going to be tons of people even that do it better than you do it. But for a certain group of people, the way you do it is exactly what they need.
That's interesting, because I find that sometimes, as far as self-esteem goes, you really get yourself in trouble when you start comparing yourself to other people, because there's always somebody out there
Totally.
or people are like, oh, you're doing that, oh, but this person's doing it and that person's doing that, this person, and you start to look at that, and I find for me that's when I start to kind of die inside. But I've had to.
Yeah, but that can be a good sign too, because that means there's an audience for it, right? Like there's people like that kind of stuff.
So you have to find ways
Yeah.
not to die inside. When you see that, you have to go,
Yep.
Find out like, okay, then, how can I get more specific about my purpose in this world? Right. And also
Yep.
how can I never compare myself to another person, because it's not helpful for anybody.
It's the enemy. Comparison is the enemy of joy, or what, I forget exactly what that,
there's a saying about it.
what that phrase is.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
This is an interesting time in life,
yeah,
because a lot of us are having to kind of dig deep and kind of really like learn the lessons, really learn the lessons.
Yep. Yeah, as terrible as it is, I kind of have been, really experiencing this notion that, even more than 2008, we're being forced to strip everything down to really the essentials in a certain kind of way. And a thing I've been advising, I work sometimes with creative services entrepreneurs to kind of help them with their own like positioning. And so I've had a couple calls recently where I've been talking to them and saying, this is really a good time to get super clear on who it is that you seek to serve, because when you know that, it becomes really clear what to say in this moment. Like you don't have to flounder, because you know exactly what the mission is that you're trying to move forward. That's
I love that.
That's a bit off topic, but I also I'm reminded of do you know who Austin Kleon is? Do you know Steal Like an Artist?
You're making me look bad now, Matt, with all your.
No, I'm not.
I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to make you look bad.
No,
I'm making a recommendation.
I'm totally joking. No, tell me.
I'm making a recommendation.
I want to know.
Making a recommendation. So Austin Kleon wrote a book. He actually wrote 3 books, but the first one is called Steal Like an Artist, which I highly recommend to anyone.
Yeah.
And it really digs into this idea that, like, there's nothing, the materials are never going to be original. It's always the way you kind of pull them together through your lens and, kind of build things out of them that's going to be unique. And I heard him on an interview with a guy named Chris Do, who I would highly recommend anyone who's, watching your show to follow a YouTube channel called The Future, Futur. Great advice for creative folks. And so Chris was interviewing Austin Kleon, and Austin Kleon told this story, which is like a twice removed story about his mentor talking to his mentor. And the question was, so I'm into God, I'm into the theater, and I'm into business. Which of those things should I choose? And his mentor said to him, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. If you're really passionate about those 3 things, like deeply passionate, equally passionate about those 3 things, spend a little time each week on each of them, like devote a little time to them, and eventually they're going to start talking to each other. And I just kind of went, and his thought about that was, you might not get a career out of that, but that's what a life is made out of, And so I think about that. I'm really curious to ask people and, talk to people about what it is that's talking, what are the things that are talking to each other in their backgrounds, because that's part of how you kind of surface like the Venn diagram of like, oh, there it is, like don't discount shit that you're really, really passionate about.
Sometimes
even if it's not the stuff you're working on,
sometimes I say that creative impulse, or the thing that's really gold to you, sometimes it's a very faint little sound that you almost have to sit still to hear it.
Yep.
And I do that sometimes. I'll cultivate a kind of a stillness just to give that some power. And because the power is usually very, it's probably the most powerful thing in me. but
Yep.
it talks really quietly for some reason.
Yeah, totally.
And sometimes you can't hear it because you
Totally.
hear all the other shit that's going on. Yeah,
Yep,
that's
totally.
great. I
It's
bet
the hardest stuff. It's the hardest stuff to uncover.
Yeah, I better wrap this up, unfortunately, because we're going a little
Okay.
long. But this is super interesting,
Yep.
Matt, and hopefully we can talk
You
again.
can edit.
Yeah, I'll go through. I'll get my
Let's
editor.
do this again. I would love to
I
do
would
more
love
of
to
these,
do.
man.
Me
because,
too. Me too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hopefully I'll eventually get off my lazy butt and get a podcast going. And
All right, that'd be
we can
good.
have a couple channels to jam on this stuff with.
That'd be cool. The internet gods were a little.
Joel, thanks so much.
This is so good talking to you, and this is probably the longest conversation we've ever had.
I'm so grateful to this horrible crisis for bringing us back together, man.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really, 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 really psyched about that.
Me too. All right, Matt. All right, thanks.
Funny.
So much.
Somebody asked if we were going to be funny.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's a lot of times it comes very philosophical. What
Yep.
can you do? What can you do? That's just that's where we are. That's where we are in this world.
Yep.
So,
All
cool.
right, brother.
So
Stay
next
safe.
time you come on, we're gonna be really funny.
Okay, cool. We can do that.